ready to start? Yeah. Nice one there. We're good to go? All right. So I wanted to offer a warm welcome to everybody attending the event here at Vocal Europe, discussing the Western Balkans and the prospects and challenges within the region in relation to the EU accession process. So my name is Julian Alojz. I am a policy analyst here at Vocal Europe. And the format of the debate is we will be starting with a short introduction by myself, followed by Clive, the Deputy Head of the Western Balkans Division of the European External Action Service. And then we will be moving on to our speakers, who will each have 6 minutes to discuss their country and how it relates to the Western Balkan accession process. Following on from this, we will be moving on to a discussion through debates, assisted by our experts who will be contributing to the discussion. And we will then move on to a Q&A section where anybody willing will be able to ask a question. So, after a long period of enlargement fatigue within the European Union, as of February 2018, the European Commission has adopted a strategy for the Western Balkans, confirming the European future of the region, setting a target date of 2025 for the accession of Serbia and Montenegro, and establishing an action plan which aims to strengthen the rule of law, increase socio-economic development across the region, and support reconciliation and good neighbourly relations between the nation states that inhabit the region. As of April 2018, the Commission then proposed the opening of accession negotiations with the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, which may now become the Northern Republic of Macedonia, and also Albania. And in May, at the Sofia Summit, the EU reaffirmed its unequivocal support for the European perspective of the Western Balkans, launching the Sofia agenda, which aims to enhance cooperation within the region and to give a forceful impetus to the region's political, economic and social transformation. The EU sees the Western Balkan European integration project as a geostrategic investment which will serve the Union's political, security and economic agenda and interests. Nevertheless, there are a number of important challenges ahead which we'll be hopefully discussing here today. First of all, the fact that none of the countries currently meet the criteria for Article 49 of the Copenhagen criteria, the need to strengthen the rule of law and good governance across the region, the continued bilateral disputes between the states of the region which require resolution, the fight against corruption and organized crime, as well as the necessity of achieving economic competitiveness across the region prior to its eventual accession to the EU per member state. So first of all, I'd like to hear a short introduction from Clive, the Deputy Head of the Western Balkans Division of the European External Action Service.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving such a good summary to start with. I think it was, you covered a number of very important points. What I want to underline, first of all, is geography, and I think it's an extremely important point. The Western Balkans are at the heart of Europe, and we belong to the same European family, and that's why we have had such a long-standing political commitment to the region. As you may know, since the Thessaloniki summit in 2003, we have been providing continuous political, financial and technical support to the Western Balkans to take forward the reforms they need to do to align with EU standards and therefore to move forward to our common goal of European integration. It was significant that the EU perspective of the region was reconfirmed by the European Council in March last year, by President Juncker's State of the Union speech in September, and very clearly by the European Commission's Western Balkans strategy that you mentioned in February this year. The central point is that we have a shared interest and a shared responsibility with the governments of the region to succeed in this for the benefit of our own EU citizens and for the citizens of the Western Balkans. It's a strategic investment for all of us. It provides increased economic and trade opportunities for the mutual benefit of the European Union and the countries which are aspiring to join. And it's a very important factor in driving transformation in the countries and societies. It increases stability and security in the countries concerned. I think there's perhaps even a deeper point when we think about our joint interest there, and when we talk about the enlargement policy. And I think it goes back to the real meaning of the project of the European Union, which is providing instruments for reconciliation and peace on our continent. The Western Balkan strategy, which was presented in February, set out a clear path for the Western Balkans to finally join the European Union and to make the progress towards the European Union irreversible. It's important to underline that joining the European Union is a choice. It's up to each Western Balkan partner to seize the opportunity and to do the necessary work. They need to concentrate all their efforts to do the necessary reforms, in particular on rule of law, justice and fundamental rights. The European Commission strategy includes 6 very concrete initiatives to help with that on rule of law, security and migration, socio-economic development, connectivity, the digital agenda and support for reconciliation and good neighbourly relations. Citizens in the Western Balkans aspire and deserve to live in a peaceful region, and this is equally important for EU citizens. That's why the strategy makes clear that the EU will not import bilateral issues, that they will all need to be resolved before the individual country's accession. We've seen great determination and commitments from leaders in the region, and there have been ups and downs, slower and faster periods of progress over the last few years, but overall, all of the 6 partners have kept moving forward. And the recognition that some of them could be ready by 2025, based on fulfilling the necessary criteria, is a strong encouragement for all countries of the Western Balkans. I want to underline that the EU's door is open to further accession, but only when the individual countries meet the criteria. The process is and remains merit-based. Montenegro and Serbia are currently negotiating, and they're moving steadily on their path towards EU membership. If they take the steps needed, they can complete the accession process with 2025 as a horizon. And this is equally true for any of the others, if they can catch up. For Serbia, this means there needs to be real progress on the dialogue with Kosovo. Comprehensive agreement on the normalisation of relations reflected in a legally binding agreement. The comprehensive agreement is also crucial for Kosovo, as are the implementation of the Stabilisation and Association Agreement and much needed reforms, including on rule of law and the economy. Kosovo is an integral part of the region and shares the same European perspective. Bosnia and Herzegovina has the prospect of obtaining candidate status. The answers to the Commission's questionnaire were handed over during the joint visit of President Juncker, Commissioner Hahn and HRVP Mogherini to Sarajevo in February this year, and work on the preparation of the Commission's opinion is currently underway. The European Commission recommended in its package of reports in April this year that accession negotiations be opened with Albania and with the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. The decision to recommend the Council to open negotiations with both Albania and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia are based on firm, strict assessments of progress made on recommendations that were previously made. And the recommendations are an encouragement to these countries to continue on the path of reforms. The Commission made equally clear that maintaining and deepening their current reform momentum will be decisive for further progress for both. The Commission assessment says clearly that Albania has met the conditions that were put in the last report and the recommendation that was adopted a year and a half ago. Albania is ready to open negotiations, maintaining and deepening the reforms which are being undertaken. The 5 key priorities will remain the key elements on which Albanian citizens will assess and judge the capacity of the institutions to deliver on their needs, and also to continue to be the basis for our common work in the future. The former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia is back on track, and the assessment that the European Commission has made, which again is merit-based, is that conditions have been met and that the recommendation to the Council is to take the decision to open negotiations. The country has also made impressive steps in addressing regional dynamics and bilateral relations, with its neighbours, most recently, of course, by the historic agreement on the name issue with Greece, which was signed last weekend. So we see a picture where all our partners in the region are moving ahead towards European integration. But I think it's important to underline that we already are very closely interlinked with the Western Balkans today. We share vital interests and we face many common challenges ranging from migration, from the economy to the environment. And the Western Balkans have proven to be valuable partners in many areas. We're already partners in security. Western Balkan countries are contributing military staff to the EU CSDP missions across the world, and all the 6 are also partners in counter-terrorism and countering violent extremism. We are partners in building prosperity. In 2016, the region's total trade with the EU was over 43 billion euros, which is up 80% since 2008, and there's significant further growth potential. The EU is the Western Balkans' largest trading partner, accounting for over 73% of the region's total trade. EU companies are the biggest investors, with over 10 billion of foreign direct investments in the past 5 years. All the countries of the region have a stabilisation and association agreement, which aims to progressively establish a free trade area between the EU and the Western Balkans. That paves the way for collective prosperity and economic growth. We are also partners in, if we're going to connect Hungary and Greece or Croatia and Bulgaria, that we have the appropriate transport and energy infrastructure across the region. And we share a common cultural and historical heritage. We need to underline and help people also in our own European Union understand better the commonalities, the links and shared interests that we already have. We need to build a new and more accurate image of the region and of those shared interests. We're doing a lot of work towards that, but we have a lot more work to do. As our colleague from Vocal Europe who introduced us mentioned, we have had a series of important rendezvous in the first part of this year. We have had the country reports from the Commission, a number of high-level visits to the region, the Western Balkans Summit in Sofia, a very important occasion bringing the Western Balkan 6 and the EU leaders around the table. This is extremely important and shows that we have a deep mutual political engagement. I want to conclude by underlining that our partnership with the Western Balkans is unique. It's built on the basis of mutual interests and a win-win situation for EU citizens and Western Balkan citizens who share the same challenges and interests. And what lies behind these interests and unites us fundamentally is that our citizens share the same values. We're not alone in being interested in the region, but the EU is the only global player that can protect the fundamental rights of individuals while bringing economic prosperity and better living standards. This year can be a turning point, and I believe we should all seize this opportunity to build our future together in our common interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clive. So, building upon that introduction about the shared interests, the shared challenges and the shared values within the Western Balkans, within the EU, and the ways that should be seen as an encouragement that the Western Balkans would indeed fit into the European Union, I would like to pass on to the next section of the event, which will be discussing the current outlook of the countries within the region. So I would like to move on to Her Excellency Suela Janina, the Ambassador of the Republic of Albania to the EU, who will now give us a talk on the current outlook for Albania within the Western Balkans. Please.
Thank you very much, first of all, for organizing this timely discussion. It's very useful. The moment is right really to talk on the progress of our countries. Although it is difficult in 5 minutes or 6 minutes to advocate for one country, and I'll try to be objective and as well as to objectively use this time for having a perspective on what Albania is looking for and what is expecting. And for that, allow me to be straightforward. Albania is hoping for and expecting opening of accession talks. And when I speak of Albania, when I refer to Albania, I does not refer only to the political elites, but mostly to the Albanian people. Not far than yesterday, 5 leaders, religious leaders of our country, have sent a letter, a plea to 2 of European leaders to support opening of accession talks. Maybe for some of you the picture of unity of our religious leaders is nothing new, because we have shown in different times that Albania is very well known for its harmonious coexistence. But I believe that it is the sincere wish of the Albanian people expressed with that. It's not a tactical move, it's nothing to do with diplomacy or other things. It's the wish of the Albanian people, their belief that we are part of Europe and it's our future to be part of this family as soon as possible. But beside of this emotional part of our plea for joining Europe, I believe that there are some other reasons for which we expect opening of accession talks. And first of all, it will be a recognition of our achievement in the path of EU reform. Albania has addressed in the last 4 years from the time that we have been granted candidate status, a lot of reforms, mainly as mentioned by Clive. We have 5 key priorities on which we have been focused on, but mainly I want to point out the justice reform, which is not only the basis, because we have a lot of progress there, but we believe that it will be a condition for having more results in other key priorities. This is a reform on which we cannot see a precedented one in the entire region. There are results every day. We have now being experienced the first result of the reform in terms of the vetting of the judges and prosecutors. We have almost 19 judges and prosecutors that have voluntarily resigned from the system, and more or less the same number of them have been scrutinized, and almost half of them have been now considered not appropriate to be part of the system. So this is something that is putting the basis for what are the most important pillars of EU integration, that is the rule of law. But mainly at the other priorities we have experienced and we have seen that concrete results have been achieved, and I don't believe that there is other means of measurement more efficacious and more credible than the Commission report. So in April the Commission decided or thought that it was the right moment for Albania to start with accession talks, and we believe that this will be a decision that will be taken also by member states. Although we understand that there are discussions on the way, those maybe that can consider that Europe should first reform and after that enlarge, but in our view and in our modest assessment, these are processes that can go along with each other. They are not excluding each other, and we don't see a way how the reform in the EU cannot go along with the reform in our region and helping also our region to be one day part of the Union. Accession talks for Albania will give surely a sense of orientation to the Europeanization process that we have undertaken. So it will represent further incentives, but also at the same time, I believe it will be good news for the region as well. It's time for the EU and for the Western Balkans not only to talk the talk, but to walk the talk. And this is the right moment that some signals are given, not only for Albania, but we hope also for our neighbor with this nice name now. So we believe that conditions are there, that some decisions are taken, and we believe that it will be a win-win priority and result for EU itself, because this European integration perspective remains the only guide for the region to further cooperate with each other, to foster regional cooperation, but also to progress in making stronger democracy, rule of law, and economic development in our region. So we hardly believe that and hope that this will be a window of opportunity that will be not closed for our region, and will not let down the aspirations of Albanian people, which are among the most pro-European in our continent, and which are in the 90% of them supporting this process. So this is what I aim for this period, and I believe that it will be really an encouragement, but also a recognition of what we have achieved, and also a recognition from our side that this is not the end of the world. Tomorrow will not be our membership day. It will be the initial of a road that will be very demanding, very challenging, but we are very eager to go through it and to one day, with the help of our partners and friends, deserve to be part of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Her Excellency Suela Janina, pardon me, talking about both the benefits and the difficulties of a candidate country or a country attending to accede to the EU. Now, I would like to pass on to Thomas Weitz, who is the Vice Chair of the European Parliament delegation to both Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I'd like to hear your ideas about what the outlook is for those two nation states within the region.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Interesting that you give me the floor second, due to the fact that we have very experienced people around the table, but I will start my intervention. I will start my intervention basically with Kosovo. First of all, I think it is to mention that Kosovo has shown really impressive progress, especially in how to handle minority policies. I mean, sure, there's still the dispute and still the conflict, or the still lasting also political conflict, how to solve the relations with Serbia and with the Serbian minorities. But the way Kosovo deals with minorities as such can be quite representing the effort of the Kosovo government to show that a vital minority policy is possible and how it can be done on the Balkans. Sure, I mean, Kosovo is still under the impression of the wars and under the impression of the violences. I think that something that I'm very looking forward to is a generational change, which is starting to happen also on the political level between the generation that has participated in the war and the generation that grew up or that started their career after the war. The difference, to my point of view, is the history that you personally bring into the political process. If you were affected or were participating in a war that is always a very cruel thing, a very leaves an impression into your life that I think you can hardly overcome. This frames the way you see politics, and this also frames the way of your capability to compromise. And so I really welcome that change. Also, you see now in the Kosovo Parliament that you have new members of the Parliament that grew up with different political circumstances. The concerns I still have about Kosovo is, and this is actually a concern that can be applied for the biggest parts of the Balkans, of the Western Balkans, is the question on the gap between theory and practice. Yes, in theory there is a certain implementation of laws that apply and comply with the rules that we have in Europe, but the question whether they're put in practice as they theoretically should is very often to be answered with a no or partly no. And to me, the question is, you know, I'm in the European Parliament for the Green Party, so it's very often my role to ask critical questions. And so I'm questioning very often whether these rules and that rule of law is put in place in practice, and how do you measure that? To me personally, I have three ways to look at it, and this is, first of all, as I'm a green person, the question on environment. Are environmental rules really applied in practice at projects where there's not that much attention? As an example, to just swap a little bit to Montenegro, where I'm also part of the delegation, to bring an example, Durgito National Park, or the question of the Salina, yeah, where there is already some European attention. How are these concerns dealt with? And is there a rule of law that is put in practice? Or the question on civil society. Is civil society seen as a threat to the state, or is civil society seen as part of what makes a modern state, and as something that contributes to the development of a society in a positive way? Even though civil society is critical sometimes, I think that's also the role of civil society, but like, is it also co-funded by the state? Are the contributions from civil society welcomed by the state? Or is the state directly supporting civil society in the job they got to do? And the third question that I try to measure is the question of media freedom. I'm constantly raising that issue also in our delegations. And media freedom is not just the theory that you theoretically are able to publish whatever you like, but again, the question is, how is it put in practice? Is there a funding for independent media? Or is funding only going to, let's say, media that seem to like the current government? Are journalists safe in that country? Or do they have to fear physical attacks? Do they have to fear if they are attacked, is there a proper jurisdiction? Are the cases really followed? Is there some convictions? Yeah. So, is the overall mood in the country providing a secure workspace for journalists? And last but not least, how are journalists treated within the state-owned or state-influenced or close to state media? Is it possible there to also raise concerns? Is it possible there to raise critical questions? There also we must say that, well, there's still vital concerns from the European side whether that is really in place. To just point a light on Bosnia, well, Bosnia is the state, I would say, of the whole Western Balkans that has the least perspective to an accession yet. I'm not very sure how frank and how open I should be about that, but in a state where one part of the population is very much aiming towards watching and leaning towards the neighbor state, in concrete Serbia, and also having the possibility to apply Serbian passports. If Serbia enters the European Union, which I would very much welcome, as I would welcome the whole Western Balkans very much in the European Union, then these people would be able to apply European passport via the Serbian side. Then you have the Croatian citizens, who, or let's say the ones that see themselves as part of the Croatian part of Bosnia, who many of them have European passports, as Croatia is a member of the European Union. So the only ones that are left behind in that state without actual accession to neighbor states or to the European Unions is the Bosniaks, or the so-called more or less Muslim believing population of Bosnia. And I think this is a situation that should really concern us, that should really worry us, because I think if we want to give a perspective, we should treat people equally, and we should really look closely how to motivate the inclusion of the Bosniak population closer to accession talks, or closer to options to enter the European Union, to study in the European Union, and to become part of our common European society. Otherwise, if we're not doing that, we will see encouraged Turkish influence, encouraged Saudi Arabian influence, and a decrease of a liberal Muslim belief, which I think is a real big should be a big wish of the European Union to include that as a part of what we call our common.
Right, thank you very much for that, for the slides. And you raised a number of very important points that are very prescient in a lot of European Union countries, such as the validity of the free press, or whether the press are able to act in a free manner, and this is an issue we're seeing in many of the EU's allies as well, in many countries. So, next up, I would like to invite the delegation from the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and soon to hopefully be known as the Republic of Northern Macedonia. Unfortunately, Alojz PETERLE will not be able to attend this meeting until 11 o'clock due to another meeting. However, I'd like to invite his colleague André DZHAMBAZKI to the Vice Chair of the European Parliament delegation to the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia to say a little piece now, and then his colleague will attend later.
Thank you, Mr. Host. Dear host, dear colleagues, Your Excellency, I would first like to thank Vocal Europe for inviting me to this roundtable. As you all very well know, the issue of the EU integration of Western Balkans is among the main priorities of the Bulgarian presidency of the Council of the European Union. In addition, I would like to apologize for the lack of modesty, but I believe that we as a country and as presidency have contributed to bring the Western Balkans in the spotlight. It is clear that these efforts were that setting the Western Balkans as a top priority was not just empty words. We can see that all the work that was put in this issue gave good results. We organized the first EU Western Balkan Summit in 15 years after Thessaloniki. In 2005, Macedonia was the front runner for European membership. Sadly, this a long period of stagnation followed. However, I'm glad to say that the government of Mr. Zaev has managed to get some momentum for the bit of Macedonia. I would like to note that the internal reforms, as well as the reform in the attitude of Republic of Macedonia internationally, are the main driver behind the recent progress of the country. We can mention that we use always Republic of Macedonia. This is the name we use because we recognize our brotherly country in early 90s. Regarding the Republic of Macedonia, I believe we can see the biggest progress. The recommendation of the Commission in April was a breakthrough. Furthermore, my country had a critical role in the mediation between Greece and Macedonia in their long-standing naming dispute. This first step forward was the Treaty of Friendship, good neighborly relations, and cooperation signed and ratified both in Bulgaria and Macedonia. The treaty solved many of the issues that were existing in the relations between our countries. Because of this document, we can agree to the name change agreed between Macedonia, both and Greece. The treaty explicitly states that neither Bulgaria nor Macedonia have any territorial claims to the other party. The name deal, which was signed last Sunday, is a welcome bit of progress. I believe that this will open the door for a real EU accession perspective for Macedonia. It is essential that it is ratified as soon as possible so that the Republic of Macedonia can continue on its way to EU membership. Of course, it is not just the political issues which have to be sorted out. The region in general is struggling economically. A clear EU perspective will boost investment and economic growth. The people of Bulgaria and Bulgarian government have a vested interest in economic development of our friends across our southwestern border and the Western Balkans in general. Instruments such as pre-accession funds should be deployed in areas such as transport, connectivity and cohesion. Thus in Bulgaria, the connectivity between our countries and between the Black and the Adriatic Seas is of great importance. In the short period after the ratification of Friendship Treaty, we have witnessed 12% increase in trade between Bulgaria and Macedonia. We are also keen to the further develop of existing economic relations and shared cultural values with our brotherly Macedonian people. I believe that the Bulgarian presidency has done a great job to emphasize the importance of EU perspective of the whole region. In conclusion, if the correct reforms continue to be implemented and if long-standing disputes are being resolved, the future of the region as part of EU looks bright.
Thank you very much, André DZHAMBAZKI. So, I would next like to move on to the points of views of the Montenegrin delegation. One of the front runners for the EU accession process as it stands, alongside Serbia. So I would like to pass the time on to Jozo RADOS, member of the European Parliament delegation to Montenegro.
Thank you very much. I would like to firstly say that I am very satisfied with the new strategy of the European Union for the Western Balkan, and especially for two expressions. One is that the Western Balkan is part of the European Union, was said too. And the second is that it is not only interest of citizens of Western Balkan countries, but it is of European citizens that Western Balkan will be part of European Union, because from Western Balkan, European Union can get stability or instability, and of course, interest of European Union to have stable area, free communication, and some kind of protection from the possible negative influence from the south. In Western Balkan, having almost 10 million Muslim European traditional citizens can be reached to the south and to the east in building European relations with its neighbor. Regarding Montenegro, it is similar as other country, but Montenegro is longer on that way, so it is possible to say that the process is very long and very slow, but very characteristic. Namely, Montenegro adopts more or less all recommendations from the European Union, adopt the different kind of very important legislation, but of course problem is of implementation of those. It is easier to change the legislation and even to build some institution than to make these institutions and that legislation effective, what means in fact to change the culture and mood of behavior of nation, of people. It is always a very, very long and complicated process. So it is a case with Montenegro. One specific of Montenegro is that political scene is fragmented, and that almost half of the citizens really don't want that country. That's a big problem of Montenegro. So I praise the adoption of new laws in Montenegro about civil servants, new laws about independence of the judiciary, but there are a lot to do in all of areas of policy. What I would like to especially stress is the question of independence of main broadcaster, Radio TV Montenegro. According to the organization of Journalist Media Center, last 17 months Montenegrin main broadcaster was independent, and I think it is very important in polarized, not only political and media scene in Montenegro. It's very important to have the main broadcaster independent and advocating genuine independence of media space. So I think it is very important that the European Union should act against the interference of government in the media area of Montenegro. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would just like to extend a welcome to Alojz, who has recently now joined us. I would like to next hear from Isabella de Monte, the substitute of the European Parliament delegation to Montenegro, and then following on from your statement, we'll move on to Mr. PETERLE.
Dear colleagues, thank you for the invitation to the expert table. I am glad to have gathered us here to discuss an important issues such as the prospects and challenges of the Western Balkans towards the EU integration. The situation is complex. On the one hand, prospects toward enlargement are positive. We know that Western Balkan countries have made significant progress toward integration and improving political stability. However, on the other hand, many challenges remain, in particular the role of law. Juncker said that there won't be an enlargement during his mandate. The European Commission and for Neighbourhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiation, HAN, has recently announced that enlargement until 2024 is possible with the respect of fundamental freedoms. Moreover, he highlighted that EU is by far the largest trading partner of the region, and 70% of foreign direct investment to the Western Balkans account for the European Union.
Could I just interrupt for one moment, just make a request that you speak a tiny bit louder, please. Just speak a little bit.
Or more. Okay, I will try.
Thank you.
In my role of substitute in the delegation of Montenegro, I would like to underline the achievement of the country in joining NATO in June 2017 and its progress for the EU membership. However, I would like to raise an important issue. In the last year, I have been involved in the protection of private property in Montenegro. This is along with the other problems such as freedom of media and expression, fight against corruption and organized crime, a current issue in the country. I wish to draw your attention on the fact that properties seized by the former regime in Montenegro are not always returned to the owners despite a restitution law issued in 2004. In EU 2016 country report on Montenegro, the restitution was declared unresolved. The current government appetite for foreign investments in Montenegro construction market is a matter of concern. Properties are sold to foreign investors coming from countries such as Serbia, Russia, China and Gulf Emirates without a fair compensation. Montenegro must have not only the legislation but also a conduct compliant with the European criteria in reference to fundamental rights, private property and restitution of seized assets. Failing to comply with the restitution law and neglecting a fundamental right such as private property are against European standards. We must consider Montenegrin government's investments in strategic development planning and strengthening business environment not only from the economic point of view, but first of all by respecting transparency and democratic values. The key word for EU economical, political and regional action in the Western Balkans must be credibility. This implies offering the Western Balkans countries a credible, achievable and manageable roadmap towards future EU membership, fighting unemployment rates, especially among young people, which still push dance for thousands of migrants to seek work in the EU. The Union in Western Balkans' largest trade partner and largest source of incoming foreign investments. The current level of economic development in the region and consequent negative social effects is one of the generators of the political crisis in the Western Balkans. As per current Commission proposal, the EU will prove credible by increasing necessary funds in addition to the existing IPA. The political commitment in the Western Balkans must remain strong. The incentives for reform included in the new EU enlargement strategy for the Western Balkans must be matched by clear standards towards which the region's government can work. The Western Balkans countries shouldn't be only stabilitocracies, but first of all democracies, strengthening the independence, impartiality and efficiency of the judiciary, fighting against corruption and organized crime by creating an environment that fully grants freedom of expression and media with respect of human rights and rule of the law must be an essential priority. Regional cooperation is important. Countries must solve bilateral and border issues. Serbia needs to conclude and implement a legally binding agreement with Pristina before it can join the European Union. Other border disputes compromise the European aspiration of the Western Balkan region countries such as Kosovo and Montenegro. I would personally like to congratulate the resolved long-lasting FYROM Greece dispute over the name Macedonia, which has been agreed as North Macedonia. This is a great achievement and confirmation that the viable stabilization of the region is possible. I believe that the European Parliament should have a more representative role in the enlargement process of the Western Balkans. For instance, in participating to the next summit in London linked to the Berlin process. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much for that, and apologies for the noise. I believe we all share the positive attitude towards the Macedonian main issue, and hopefully the resolution comes swiftly. So I would like to move back slightly, back towards the delegations representing the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and hopefully the Republic of Northern Macedonia soon. Alojz, PETERLE.
Thank you very much. I think that you are all experts here and you know region very well, and I don't like to repeat the facts which have been mentioned already or are known, but just to remind you a little bit the Macedonian story. The country got independence in '91, as Slovenia and Croatia did, and then they got UN membership under the name former Republic of Macedonia in '93. Then Greece recognized the country 2 years later. In 2005, Macedonia became a candidate for EU membership, and in 2008 there was a Greek blockade on NATO invitation of Macedonia over objections to the country's name. This is quite a long story or history, but then let mention one more fact. In 2011, the International Court of Justice in The Hague rules that Greece was wrong to block Macedonia's bid to join NATO, but the ruling didn't have any particular influence on the issue. And in February 2018, Greece said the dispute over the name of Macedonia could be resolved within months, and at the level of the Prime Minister, this was true, this happened 2 days ago, agreement was signed. I would say that many stakeholders were engaged, all European institutions, of course Mr. Nemet's bilateral teams led by Prime Ministers. There was also strong contribution from the European Parliament, which has been involved also through, I would say, special troika led by Mr. KUKAN, our colleague from the Parliament. So many players welcomed the agreement, which I have to say this welcoming spirit was not shared by everybody. No, in Greece, no, in FYROM, you know that there were protests on both sides, and I will not describe this agreement, which I suppose is known to you. It consists of 20 articles, and it is not just about the so-called name issue. It is not just the problem what will happen with the name. But there is also the question how the adjective Macedonian will be or should be used, and so on. This will have quite many technical consequences, let's say so, because many things will have to be changed, not just the constitution, what is a particularly sensitive issue. I would like to make a very political comment. I'm head of delegation, parliamentary delegation to joint parliamentary committee to Macedonia, and such delegations or committees are responsible for all relations between EU and Macedonia, and I will not comment the articles, but I would like to comment the spirit. So after 27 years, or after 10 years of 2 more minutes.
Oh, apologies. This is a 2-minute marker, so you have 2 minutes left to speak.
2 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Thank you. It's quite a lot. I think that the spirit is different. What 2 prime ministers did definitely led to a new momentum, and now the political question is whether this agreement will be endorsed by 2 sides. It's quite a demanding, politically demanding process, but I think that we should take into account the consequences if this agreement is not endorsed. No? Who and when will be able to come with a better solution? This is the question. We saw the consequences of the blockade. Now we see an attempt which resulted in a signed agreement, and we know that with agreements we are never satisfied in all respects, but such agreements can lead countries to another quality or level of relations. And of course, if the agreement is endorsed, this means, I will be very short, NATO membership and opening of accession negotiations. And there is not just a problem between 2 partners, there is also the question how European Union entirely or member states will react to that. I would suggest that we don't consider that no member country considers this achievement as a kind of problem for deepening of the European Union before the next enlargement. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Alojz PETERLE. So I would now like to move on to our last speaker of this portion of the event, Eduard KUKAN, who is the chair of the European Parliament delegation to Serbia. And I'd like to hear your outlook on the outlook of the region.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that you convened this conference. The time and subject were very well chosen. Serbia has been already 4 years in the accession negotiations, and at this time we could see some progress in the reforms necessary for the integration process. Serbia has opened 12 negotiating chapters, 2 of which have been provisionally closed, and expects to open 2 more for now. Among those already open, we should be following closely 23, 24, and chapter 35. Serbia is making a stable progress in the accession negotiations. The pace of some reforms does not always match our expectations. The most crucial reforms, such as reform of justice system, public administration reform, are still a great challenge for Serbia. We also expect more to be done in relation to civil liberties, freedom of media, and fight against organized crime and corruption. Serbia's accession negotiation sets a good example for the region. It certainly stirs motivation in other countries of the region. It's important that adopted policies, action plans, and agreements are properly implemented. It's also important that Serbia continues to strengthen the citizens' awareness of the practical result of European integration. The accession process brings many advantages, and membership many advantages. However, they need to be still explained to the general population. Serbian citizens need to feel more ownership of the process, which is one of the conditions for full and successful integration to the EU. I think it applies to other countries as well. Now, a couple of more remarks concerning the security in the region. Serbia remains to be one of the biggest non-EU contributors to military EU missions and counter-terrorism missions, which is a sign of close cooperation in the field of security and defense. It's different in the field of alignment of Serbia with the European Union foreign policy, which has left much to be desired. Now concerning the regional cooperation, Serbia is playing positive role. I especially appreciate that Serbia and Albania managed to organize their bilateral relation after that dramatic beginning in a good way, because I think that if bilateral cooperation between these two countries functions well, it contributes positive dynamics for the development of the whole region. Serbia make progress in relations with Kosovo. We expect problems, but they are making progress. We expect both sides implementations of the 2015 agreement, especially in energy and association of Serb community in Kosovo. Concerning the players in the Western Balkans, if we take EU, United States, China, Russia, and Turkey, I think that each of them has a legitimate interest in their presence in the region. At the same time, the motivation and scope of influence remain different. EU in Serbia has predominantly focused on the rule of law, trade and human rights. EU is also single largest investor in the Serbian economy, accounting for approximately 80% of all foreign direct investment in the country in 2016. United States, on the other hand, has a larger national security interest in the country due to its location on migration routes from Middle East and Central Asia, and has focused on combating terrorism and trafficking. Energy politics and the use of Serbia as a foreign policy tool against the West appears to be the focus of Russia in the country, with trade and investment being of lesser priority. China's main interest in Serbia appears to be infrastructure investment and creating a hub in the Balkans for Chinese goods as part of the broader One Belt, One Road initiative globally. Concerning the EU perspective, Serbia is trying to balance between different options. However, continued progress towards EU accession should eventually bring the country to align its foreign policy with the EU. We know the arguments of our Serbian colleagues. They say that when they are going to exceed the alignment with the 100%, but still we think that they could do much better now. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for that, Eduard KUKAN. That was very kind of you to share your time with us, as it was for all of you. So I would like to now move on to the next stage of the event, which will be a debate. So I would like to introduce our 4 contributors who are all experts in their fields. So we have André de MUNTER, who is a policy analyst at the European Parliament. We have Milena HARITO, who is the former Minister of State for Innovation and Public Administration of Albania. We have Jozo, who is a policy analyst at the Center for European Policy Studies here in Brussels. And we have Corina, who is the senior policy analyst at the European Policy Center in Brussels. So I would like to start the debate off, first of all, by picking up on something that Eduard KUKAN said in regards to the intervention of the Western Balkans nations in the region. So, for example, the influences of Russia within the region, as well as recent activity by the Turkish state in Kosovo, for example. I wanted to know, in regards to these types of issues that are emerging alongside the economic and the regional political issues, do you agree with the EU's approach to the region in regards to how it's encouraging the accession process? You have a loaded question.
Do you want me to begin?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So, thank you for inviting me. Perhaps just to explain for the others why Local Europe asked me to be here. I am French and Albanian. During the second part of my life, I have lived 20 years in France and the last 5 years in Albania, where I was first the Minister of Public Administration and Innovation, and then the Sherpa of the Prime Minister to set up the cooperation with the region, so with the 5 other Prime Minister offices, and especially, as Mr. KUKAN mentioned, with Serbia, which was quite an issue, and it happened that the that Ana Brnabić, the Prime Minister of Serbia, was before the Minister of Public Administration also, so we had very good relations. And we have done a lot in just 2 years to create a cooperation that even didn't exist at all before. Now I am back in France, and I will not talk about Albania, I will talk about the whole